When I was 15, my parents left me at my grandparents' farm so they could focus on my younger sister's gymnastics career. They called it temporary, but they never came back for me. Years later, I built a successful life, a business, and a family of my own. When my parents returned broke and desperate, they assumed they still had a place in my life. They were wrong. The gravel crackled under the tires of my father's sedan, a sound like bones breaking. I stood on the porch of my grandparents' farmhouse, a duffel bag at my feet, watching the car disappear down the long, sun-bleached driveway in a plume of Oklahoma dust. The silence that followed was absolute, a physical weight pressing on my 15-year-old chest. Inside that car were my parents, my little sister, and the entirety of my old life, receding into the heat shimmer. They were headed back to Dallas, to a 2-bedroom apartment that now had a dedicated training space for my sister, Zoe, the 9-year-old gymnastics prodigy. There was no room for me, the unremarkable, bookish older daughter who needed too much and whose moodiness was a distraction during Zoe's crucial formative years. The explanation had been delivered over a tense breakfast that morning. My mother's voice was brittle with faux regret. "It's just for a little while, Leah. Just until Zoe gets through this next competitive season. You'll love the farm. It's an adventure." My father hadn't met my eyes, just nodded along, his jaw tight. Zoe, tiny and fierce in a leotard, had hugged me with arms like steel bands and whispered, "Don't be sad. You'll get to have a horse." She saw it as a fun summer camp. I saw it for what it was, an abandonment. The screen door squeaked open behind me. Grandma May appeared, wiping her hands on a flowered apron. She didn't offer empty platitudes. She looked at the disappearing dust, then at my stiff, heartbroken back. "Well," she said, her voice a low, warm rumble. "They're fools. But you're here now. Let's get you settled. The chickens won't feed themselves." That was my welcome. No pity, just purpose. Grandpa Joe emerged from the barn, a man of few words, his face a roadmap of sun and sorrow. He nodded at me, a single, grave dip of his head that felt more like recognition than greeting. "Barn cat had kittens. You're on feeding duty." And so, my new life began. Not an adventure, but an exile. The first nights were a torrent of silent tears into a rough cotton pillowcase. I missed my friends, my room, the mundane rhythm of school and suburban life. I hated the relentless quiet, broken only by animal sounds and the wind. I hated the smell of hay and manure. I hated the endless, back-breaking chores. I was a city girl, plopped into a world where my value was measured by how fast I could collect eggs or how straight I could stack hay bales. My grandparents were not cruel, but they were not soft. They were survivors. The farm, a 200-acre patch of red dirt and stubborn grass, was their universe, and it was struggling. The bank letters came monthly, and I saw the worry in the deep lines around Grandpa Joe's eyes. They communicated in a shorthand of gestures and shared labor. They didn't ask about my feelings. They expected me to work. And so I worked. I learned to mend fences, to birth a calf, to distinguish between a weed and a seedling. My hands grew calloused, my skin tanned and freckled. The soft, introspective girl began to harden, layer by layer, like the earth under the summer sun. Communication with my old life was sporadic. A weekly phone call on Sunday evenings. My mother's voice was always breathless, a recitation of Zoe's triumphs, a new skill mastered, a high score at a meet, a compliment from a famous coach. "We're so proud of her, Leah. She's really going places. How's the farm?" The question was an afterthought. My stories of learning to drive the tractor or saving a lamb seemed mundane, pathetic in comparison. My father's contributions were financial. "Are your grandparents feeding you enough? Do you need anything?" The subtext: "We're fulfilling our obligation." The calls grew shorter, further apart. By the time I turned 16, they felt like interviews with distant acquaintances. The turning point, the moment the exile began to feel like a sanctuary, came during harvest season. A catastrophic hailstorm threatened to wipe out the entire wheat crop, our main source of income for the year. Grandpa Joe stood at the edge of the field, his hat in his hands, watching the sky with a despair I'd never seen. Without a word, Grandma May started pulling tarps from the barn. We worked through the night, the three of us, trying to shield the most vulnerable sections. The hail came anyway, a furious, deafening onslaught. Afterward, the field was a massacre of broken stalks. We sat on the porch, soaked and defeated. I expected despair. Instead, Grandpa Joe put a heavy, work-worn hand on my shoulder. "We saved the North Quadrant. Thanks to you." It was the first time he'd thanked me for anything. In that moment, covered in mud and exhaustion, I felt more seen, more essential than I ever had in my parents' pristine, Zoe-centric world. This was real. This loss, this effort, this shared silence, it was real. I stopped yearning for Dallas. The farm became my home. I flourished in the small, rural school, where my city knowledge made me interesting and my work ethic, forged on the farm, earned respect. I discovered a passion in the land itself. I started reading Grandpa Joe's old agricultural journals, pestering the local extension agent with questions about soil health and sustainable practices. While Zoe was winning ribbons, I was winning science fairs with projects on companion planting and water conservation. When I was 17, my grandparents sat me down at the kitchen table. The bank was calling in a loan. The farm was in real danger. "We don't want this for you, Leah," Grandma May said, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "You're smart. You should go to college. Get away from this struggle." I looked at them, these two people who had given me a home without fanfare, who had taught me resilience instead of resentment. "This is my home," I said, my voice firm. "And I'm not letting it go." I spent that summer experimenting with a quarter-acre plot, growing heirloom tomatoes and unique peppers. I sold them at a roadside stand, but also to a fancy restaurant in the city an hour away, charming the chef with my knowledge of varietals and my chemical-free methods. The profit was small, but it was a start. I applied to the State University's agricultural science program with a fierce, personal essay about legacy and innovation and won a full scholarship. My parents, vaguely aware I was going to college, sent a check for books. It felt like hush money. Zoe was by then a regional champion, and they were following her to training camps across the country. I was a footnote. College was my liberation and my weapon. I absorbed every piece of knowledge, focusing on organic farming, business management, and brand development. I came home every weekend and holiday, turning more of our land into experimental plots. I launched a website, Red Dirt Heirlooms, selling seeds and specialty produce online. Grandpa Joe, skeptical of the computer farming, became my most valuable asset, his lifetime of intuitive knowledge blending with my scientific approach. Grandma May handled the customers, her warmth translating into loyal repeat business. By my graduation, the farm was not just surviving, it was pioneering. We paid off the bank loan. Red Dirt Heirlooms had a cult following among foodies and home gardeners. I'd been written up in a national magazine. My parents, when a cousin sent them the article, called with stunned, stilted congratulations. It was as if they were discovering a stranger. Zoe's career, meanwhile, followed a predictable arc of intense early success, followed by injuries, burnout, and the brutal reality of a sport that discards its stars young. At 20, she blew out her knee in a disastrous meet attempt. Her Olympic dream evaporated. The sponsors left. My parents had poured their savings, their retirement, their very identity into her trajectory. With it gone, they were left with a bitter, directionless young woman and a mountain of debt. I was 25 by then, and the farm was a recognized brand. I'd bought out my grandparents' ownership, though they still lived and worked there, now as paid consultants, and was expanding into value-added products, sauces, pickles, dried herbs. I'd also met Ben. He was a wildlife biologist working on a grassland conservation project next to our property. He was steady, kind, and had a reverence for the land that mirrored mine. He loved me for my calloused hands and my spreadsheets, for my stubbornness and my quiet joy in watching things grow. We built a small, eco-friendly house on a corner of the farm. When he proposed, under the old oak tree where I'd spent countless teenage afternoons reading, it felt like the final, perfect piece of my life clicking into place. We planned a wedding for the following autumn, to be held right there on the farm, a celebration of the land and the community that had saved me. My parents re-entered my life with the subtlety of a tornado. They called one evening, their voices a discordant duet of false cheer and underlying panic. They were between places. Zoe was exploring new opportunities. They thought it was time to reconnect as a family. Could they come for a visit? The visit was a performance of staggering awkwardness. They pulled up in a car that was too new and too expensive, clearly leased, a last bastion of pretend prosperity. My mother, Cynthia, looked fragile, her designer clothes hanging on a frame grown thin with stress. My father, David, had a bluff, hearty manner that rang hollow. Zoe, at 21, was a storm cloud of resentment and athleisure wear, her eyes constantly scanning my home, my land, with a palpable sense of injustice. They toured the farm, my mother making delicate, disapproving sounds at the dirt. My father asked questions about revenue with a transparent, hungry curiosity. Zoe barely spoke. Over a dinner I cooked from our own produce, the mask slipped. "Leah, this is all so impressive," my mother began, her smile tight. "We had no idea you'd built something so substantial. We always knew you were resourceful," my father added, pouring himself more of my expensive wine. "It's a lot of hard work," I said simply. "Hard work," Zoe muttered, pushing her food around her plate. "Lucky more like." The conversation pivoted, as I knew it would, to their troubles. The condo was gone. The debts were substantial. Zoe needed guidance. My father's job in middle management had been restructured. "We were thinking," my mother said, reaching across the table to pat my hand, "that family should stick together. This place is so big. We could help. David could manage the business side. I could handle hospitality. And Zoe, she needs a fresh start. A quiet place to find herself." The audacity stole my breath. They saw it not as a lifeline I might offer, but as a right they could claim. They saw my success as communal family property, a reward for their earlier sacrifice, the sacrifice of me. Ben, sitting beside me, tensed. I placed my hand over his under the table. "The business is structured and staffed," I said, my voice cool. "We don't need management. And the house is full." My father's smile vanished. "Leah, don't be difficult. We're your parents. We're in a tight spot. After everything we've done for you. Everything you've done for me." I interrupted, the calm in my voice belying the earthquake inside. "You left me here. You forgot about me. You built your whole world around Zoe until it collapsed. You didn't do anything for me. My grandparents did. I did." My mother's eyes filled with theatrical tears. "How can you say that? We provided for you. We sent you to college. You sent a check, Mom. You didn't send yourselves. You didn't call. You didn't visit. For 10 years, I was an administrative task on your to-do list." The evening devolved into recriminations and tears, theirs. They left the next morning in a huff, but it was not the end. It was the opening salvo. The calls and emails began, guilt-tripping, threatening, cajoling. They enlisted flying monkeys, aunts, uncles, old family friends, to preach forgiveness and family duty. I became a fortress, with Ben and my grandparents as my steadfast garrison. I had my lawyer send a formal letter stating that no financial or residential assistance would be forthcoming, and that further harassment would be met with legal action. The word harassment enraged them, but it stopped the direct attacks. Through all this, we were deep in wedding planning. It was to be an intimate affair. 200 of our nearest and dearest, friends, farm employees, neighbors, the community that was my real family. My grandparents would walk me down the aisle. There was never a single moment of debate about inviting my parents or Zoe. They had relinquished their roles years ago. Their absence would be noted, but by those who mattered, it would be understood. We sent the invitations. We hired security, a discreet firm familiar with handling disruptive individuals at events, and gave them photographs of my parents and sister. It felt both sad and necessary. 2 weeks before the wedding, my mother called. Her tone was new, conciliatory, wounded. "Leah, honey, we still haven't received our invitation. I know the mail can be slow. Could you just give me the details? We need to book flights, and, well, you know things are tight." I took a deep breath, standing in the field where the wedding tent was being erected. "There is no invitation, Mom. You are not invited to the wedding." The silence on the line was absolute, then a sharp intake of breath. "What did you say? You are not invited. This day is for the people who have been my family, who have supported and loved me. That doesn't include you." She began to cry, then to scream. "You can't do this. We are your parents. We gave you life. This is a betrayal. What will people think?" The performance cycled through rage, pleading, and finally, cold fury. "You will regret this, Leah. You mark my words." The wedding day dawned clear and golden, an Oklahoma autumn masterpiece. The farm was transformed. Twinkling lights were strung in the old oak trees. Long tables ran along the edge of the vegetable garden, now bursting with late harvest bounty. The air smelled of wood smoke, grilled food, and flowers. I felt a profound, unshakable peace as Grandma May helped me into my simple linen dress, as Grandpa Joe fumbled with the clasp of my necklace, his eyes suspiciously bright. The ceremony was perfect. We stood under an arch woven with sunflowers and wheat stalks, and promised each other a life of growth and loyalty. As I looked out at the faces of our guests, the farmhands in their best shirts, my college friends, Ben's colleagues, the chef from the city who'd been my first customer, I felt only love. The absence of three people was a hollow space, but it was not an emptiness, it was a healed scar. The reception was in full swing, the band playing, laughter ringing out, when the security chief, a calm giant named Marcus, quietly approached me and Ben at the head table. He leaned in. "Ms. Morrison, your biological parents and sister are at the main gate. They are insisting on entry. They are quite agitated. We have them contained, but they are causing a scene. What would you like us to do?" I looked at Ben. He squeezed my hand. "Your call, my love." I stood. "I'll handle it." I walked away from the music, down the lantern-lit path toward the front of the property, my dress brushing against the dry grass. Ben and Marcus flanked me, a silent show of support. At the ornate iron gate we'd installed for the wedding, a scene of surreal indignity was unfolding. My father was red-faced, shouting at a stoic security guard. My mother was weeping dramatically, clinging to the bars. Zoe stood apart, arms crossed, her face a mask of contempt, filming everything on her phone, no doubt for some sympathetic social media post. They saw me approach and fell silent. I stopped a few feet inside the gate. The contrast was stark. Me, calm, surrounded by the warmth and light of my celebration. Them, outside in the gathering dusk, twisted by anger and entitlement. "Leah, thank God," my mother cried. "Tell these men to let us in. This is absurd. You are not welcome here," I said, my voice carrying clearly in the quiet. "We are your family," my father roared. "You have a duty. This is our daughter's wedding." "You have a daughter," I corrected, my heart a steady drum in my chest. "But I haven't been your daughter since you left me on that porch. The people inside, celebrating with me, they are my family. You are strangers who share my DNA. That's all." Zoe lowered her phone, her sneer vivid. "You think you're so special now? With your little farm and your boring life? You're just a spiteful, lonely girl trying to get back at us for loving me more. And it's pathetic." Her words, meant to wound, slid off the armor I'd spent a decade forging. "I'm not lonely, Zoe. And I'm not spiteful. I'm at peace. Something you'll never understand as long as you think the world owes you for a talent you didn't sustain." My mother clutched the gate. "Leah, please. Let us in. Let's just forget the past. We can be a family again. We can walk you down the aisle." "Grandpa Joe already did," I said softly. It was beautiful. The finality of it hit them. My father's bluster deflated. He looked old, broken. My mother's tears became real, quiet, and hopeless. They finally understood. This was not a negotiation. This was a consequence. "You have no seats here," I said, finalizing it. "Not at this wedding. Not at my table. Not in my life. You made your choice a long time ago. Now live with it." I turned and began walking back toward the lights and the music. I didn't look back. I heard my mother's wail, a raw sound of genuine loss, but it was the loss of what they could now see they had thrown away, not the loss of me. I was already gone. I returned to my wedding, to my husband, to my family. Ben wrapped his arms around me, and I melted into him. The last ghost of that 15-year-old girl on the porch finally laid to rest. The party swelled around us, a vibrant, joyful testament to a life built on love, not obligation, on choice, not chance. Later, under a blanket of stars, dancing with my grandfather to a slow song, he whispered, "Proud of you, kid. Always were." That was the only blessing I needed. My parents eventually slunk away, back to the uncertain future they'd crafted. I heard through the grapevine they moved to a small town in another state, relying on distant relatives. Zoe's social media campaign portraying me as a heartless villain gained little traction. The truth, when it came from the solid, respectable members of my community, held more weight. My life with Ben on the farm is full. We have a daughter now, a fierce little thing with dirt on her knees and her grandfather's steady gaze. We are teaching her about the land, about resilience, about the family you choose. Sometimes, when I tuck her in, I think of that long-ago driveway and the dust. I don't feel anger anymore. I feel a distant pity for the people who couldn't see the value in the quiet, growing thing right in front of them. They backed the shining, fragile star. I became the deep, enduring earth. And from that earth, I built a world where love has deep roots, and there is not a single seat for those who only appreciate the harvest after ignoring the planting. Family is more than blood. It's the people who show up. If this story resonated, please like, share, and subscribe for more tales of resilience and redemption.